she was different, but it's like she...
After much anticipation, Daredevil Born Again is finally released, and we are 7 episodes in, only 2 left. And I like it generally. I've been enjoying it for the most part. However, there have been some fairly big issues. There's a lot of episodes that feel kind of out of place. There's some character decisions that I think feel out of character, and the reshoots and additional ADR are unfortunately extremely noticeable and a little distracting at times.
Come on, Benny!
Christ! So what now?
Every day Bullseye goes to the chow hall, eats his slop.
You know he gets to breathe the same air that you breathe.
So he's back.
We don't know that for sure.
Get out. I don't know what he's talking about.
However, I'm not here to discuss any of that because I have a whole other video planned to talk about my in-depth thoughts on Born Again, whatever they end up being by the end of episode 9. In this video, I want to talk about a specific subplot in Born Again that had a lot of anticipation around it and a lot of excitement around it. That subplot being about Muse, a Daredevil villain that was created not even a decade ago, but had a pretty big impact on the fan base. Now I'm going to be completely honest, straightforward, out of the gate. My knowledge on the character of Muse is extremely limited. I've read like one comic about him, and it was like 4 or 5 years ago, back when I was still in high school. Don't really know that much about him. I don't know what his motivation is. I don't know what his ultimate goal is outside of brutally murdering people and displaying their bodies. I know very little about him. I know he has powers in the comics that aren't in the show. So in this video, I'm not going to be critiquing the storyline of Muse as an adaptation because, as I said, I'm not that well versed on it. This is strictly a critique on how the show has structured this plot line. I know there's plenty of Muse fans who are pissed, especially after this last episode, understandably. However, I'm not a big Muse fan. I simply don't know enough about him or the lore. So this isn't a critique of how they utilized him in a comic book adaptation sense. It's not a critique on how they failed Muse or anything like that. This is more of storytelling critique, if anything. Going into the show, I was really excited about this Muse storyline because I had heard such great things about the character and how much of a threat he can be to Matt Murdock. I was pretty hyped for this storyline, and going into it, I actually thought that Muse was going to be the main villain, and pretty quickly I've realized that that's not really the case. He is much more of a subplot, and that's okay. I have no actual issue with that. I think making him the main villain could have made the narrative a bit tighter, and maybe a bit stronger and given more room to breathe to other characters. But having him be a subplot, I think, works fine. And that brings me to my first point. In order to understand the problem with Muse in this show, we need to understand what his role is meant to be and what point he serves. The purpose of Muse in this season of Daredevil is to bring back Daredevil, essentially. He's not here to be the big threat. That's Fisk and his anti-vigilante task force. And that's okay. I think having Muse as a subplot actually could work really well in this show. I know it's taking much more of an episodic approach than the original Netflix show did, and that's a perfectly fine thing to do. And having Muse be a subplot that's slowly building in the background, I think is actually a really good idea. However, the foundation has to be better, and that's where the first problem arrives. Episode 2 is our first real introduction to Muse. In episode 1, there's a scene where you see a guy in a hoodie who's painting graffiti of Fisk, and that's probably him. But his back is turned, and we don't really get a glimpse of him, so I'm barely counting that. Our first real interaction, seeing him and meeting him, is in episode 2 when he meets Heather Glynn. In this scene, he asks her for her autograph, and if he can come see her for a visit because he's feeling very depressed and he has some mental issues he needs to resolve, something along those lines. She tells him to email her, and right off the bat, this is a fantastic way to introduce a villain. Especially because I think most people already knew that this guy was going to be Muse. Having the serial killer in this show go to a therapist that the hero is directly connected to, especially romantically, is a great foundation and a great idea. You could create so much tension, constantly wondering whether or not Muse would snap, constantly wondering if he would do something bad to her, trying to figure out whether or not he truly cares for her or if this is all a game. And along with that, it's a great way to understand this character without hammering it in. Think of like the Fisk and Dex storyline in season 3, where Fisk was getting in Dex's head by reading his files and analyzing his trauma and understanding him. Only in this season, Heather would be doing the same thing, but in this case, she's trying to help him. And you could have a similar scenario where you see all this trauma that's happened to him. Unfortunately, after episode 2, this plotline is dead. We don't get a mention of Heather seeing this new client ever. She sees Fisk and Vanessa and counsels their marriage for a few episodes, and that's it. And then the next time we see Muse is at episode 4 at the beginning, where he's in his full costume carrying somebody, and then at the end of the episode we see that he kills that person by draining their blood. And then episode 5 he's not there, and episode 6, that is his big official episode where he makes his debut, his real debut, and that's where Daredevil and Fisk become aware of him and realize they need to stop him. In that episode, Heather still has no scenes with him, and then episode 7, Heather finally has a scene with him. And when I watched this episode, I thought this was the first time that they were meeting, and maybe they were going to do something here. Maybe her ignoring him for so long or putting him off for so long caused him to snap and become Muse. And that is a fairly interesting idea as well. And then, as they started talking, and as the dialogue started, I realized they've apparently been having sessions off screen this entire time. Which is so fucking stupid. Why the fuck would you do that? I don't know if their scenes were just cut from the show for whatever reason, because they didn't fit in or whatever, or if maybe they were just never shot and the pre-overhaul team was actually that fucking stupid, but holy shit, what a waste. Like, I'm not that mad that Muse was killed, quote-unquote, at the end of the episode. All those moments we could have had of character development for both Heather and Muse is gone. We just don't get to see it. And now we have this rushed scene of Muse finally talking, and they're trying to cram in all this character development before he dies, and it just doesn't work. It just feels so odd. Almost like it was an afterthought, like they forgot that they had to do this. To give credit, Hunter, I think his last name is Dorden, is doing a really great job as Muse. Like, he's being fairly creepy, he's doing a really good job. I'm really bummed that we didn't get more of him, or at least a better story with him. But at the end of episode 7, it just feels like a waste of time. There was no suspense really given. He's just a generic serial killer that's on screen randomly and then dies. It reminds me of Jeremiah Valeska in Gotham Season 5. You know, he randomly appeared in a few episodes, they counted it as build-up, and then he had one big episode and he was gone the rest of the season. And then he came back in the finale for a few cameos and then got beat. And that was really it. It felt like a waste. And this kind of reminds me of that, only maybe a little bit more severe, and frankly really disappointing. After this, Muse reveals that Heather basically created him, she inspired him.
It was you. I read your books. I've watched you. You know. You understand.
You've unlocked something in me, Dr. Glenn. Something I didn't know was missing. You've allowed my creativity to flourish, to soar to heights I never even imagined.
And then reveals that she is the final piece of his grand plan, and basically that he's going to murder her. Like I said, it all just feels off. Everything about Muse centers around Heather. I don't understand why, because the show didn't give me time to understand his character. But if you're going to have everything about Muse tie to Heather, and everything about him, his motivation, his goal, even his creation to some extent, apparently, if you're going to have all of that revolve around Heather, you need to properly explain and show that. You need to show the connection these two have for me to buy that. You can't just say that and then expect me to buy it. You need to actually do the effort and show those scenes. Show me, why does Muse care so much about Heather? This whole final grand plan revolves around her, but the show doesn't really give me anything to go off of other than a 2-minute scene where he's talking about Taekwondo and how much he hated it and how his parents were mean and didn't let him leave. And if it was reworked, I can see it working really well, but as what we have now just kind of feels awkward. Because right after this, Daredevil jumps in for the worst fight in the entire fucking show. I seriously can't stress enough how fucking awful this fight is. It is genuinely atrocious. The fight is just so choppily edited for really no reason. There's a constant cut every second. Compare this to the first fight. In the first fight from episode 6, there are 51 cuts. And in the second fight, from the moment that Matt breaks through the window all the way to Muse's death, there are, I shit you not, 76 fucking cuts. So first of all, it is worth noting that the first fight in episode 6 is a little bit longer than the one in episode 7. And also, the most important thing is, while there are about 50 cuts in the first fight, look at how the shots are done. Whenever they cut, they let the camera breathe for a second. There's frequently moments where you get to see what's happening. You see Matt just wailing on Muse. You can actually see what the fuck is happening without slowing the fight down. The camera actually sits there and breathes before cutting again. There's nothing wrong with a fight scene having a bunch of cuts. That's fairly normal. But you have to cut the scene well. You have to give the camera a second to breathe sometimes. You can't just constantly cut. Over the course of a minute-long fight, there are 76 fucking cuts. That is absolutely fucking insane. The fight for episode 6 is almost 2 straight minutes long. This one's like a minute and 15 seconds, maybe 10, honestly. It's a very short fight. And there are almost 100 fucking cuts. That is absolutely fucking insane. There really is nothing to justify it. Like, sometimes quick cut action can kind of work, like the Captain America fight in Winter Soldier, for instance. In that fight, it works because you're stuck in an elevator, and it's trying to create this kind of claustrophobic vibe. Everything is happening super quickly from Captain America's POV because there's so much to keep track of. So the quick cuts there are not only done better, but it still works. It works for that environment and for the intensity of that scene. And also in that scene, there are still a few moments where the camera breathes so you can properly adjust to what's happening. This fight scene takes place in a big-ass office, so there really is no justification for the constant cutting. And the camera never takes a second to fucking breathe until after Muse is dead. It's unfucking believable. And it's just really distracting and kind of gives me a headache. And when you're up at 3 o'clock in the morning counting every single fucking cut in this minute-long fight scene, and it takes you 20 minutes because you have to slow the whole fucking thing down, it gets you kind of grumpy and it gives you a bit of a headache. And in this scene, I had a realization, and it just made me giggle. Muse has only talked twice in this entire show, and neither one of them was to Matt Murdock or Daredevil. Muse and Daredevil don't say a fucking word to each other before he dies. He's just kind of there to give us 2 Daredevil fight scenes, only one of which is actually good. And I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. I'm not sure what these two are like really in the comics, but if I remember right, in the little bit that I read about Muse, I feel like they did talk to each other. Am I wrong? I'm not sure, again, if Heather Glynn is this tied to him in the comics either, but whatever the case may be, this show could have done a much better job establishing it. And because all the buildup was so faulty, the conclusion to his arc feels so unsatisfying. Now, real quickly, I just want to dive into this because this pisses me off. This episode particularly had a very hard time being consistent with Matt's ability to hear, which was really fucking odd. Do you know how hard it is to kill somebody in front of Daredevil? The idea that Heather just snuck, grabbed the gun, and then fucking killed Muse doesn't work for me. Not as long as Daredevil's there. He would have definitely stopped her. And frankly, it's really odd that she didn't realize that she would do that, because he's definitely done that before with much better trained killers such as Punisher and Elektra. And for those of you who might be saying, well, he was distracted, I don't think you understand how ridiculously good Daredevil's senses are. Stan Lee himself said his senses are stronger than Spider-Man's spider sense. Daredevil's radar sense is really fucking precise. Even in the Netflix show, he was always aware when somebody was sneaking up in the room. He was always very good at picking up on people. Here, he doesn't even become aware that she grabbed the gun. That's a very big thing to miss. And it's really odd in this episode because it just feels so contrived. The problem, let me be very clear, is not that Muse dies, or dies, quote unquote. He'll be back in season 2, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know why I'm doing the quote unquote. Hunter Jordan is literally confirmed to be in season 2. So what that means is either A, Muse isn't actually dead, or B, the far more likely option, he'll come back to life and he'll have his powers from the comics that way. Just putting that out there. If you're upset that he's dead, I get it. It was a shitty death, but he'll be back. He's gonna come back to life with powers. That's probably what'll happen. And if that doesn't happen, then he isn't actually dead because he'll be in season 2. And I highly, highly, highly doubt it'll be for a flashback because, frankly, what the fuck would you flashback to? He'll be back, guys. Trust me. This is Marvel. Do you think anyone actually dies for real? The problem with this episode is the execution of Muse's death. The fucking awful fight with him and Daredevil. The fact that him and Daredevil really don't have any interaction outside of fighting each other. They have no real rivalry going on. The fact that Heather Glynn fucking grabs a gun without Daredevil's knowledge and just fucking blows him away. However, I will be fair and say I think the last shot of Muse laying down and after he's been shot is a really good one. The idea of this season ending with him being the final piece in his art and dying kind of displayed like that, I think is a really good idea. And had the show had better foundation and had a better setup for his character, it would have been much better executed, and I would have liked it a lot more. However, because so much revolves around Heather Glynn, and because they only have 2 scenes, and because he's in so little of the first few episodes, it just feels lazy. Like he was a freak of the week for 2 weeks, and then they just kind of cast him aside, like they would in the fucking Flash show. So now what we have is just kind of awkward, because everyone is talking about how great Muse is supposed to be, and then in this season he's just kind of a one and done. And there's nothing wrong with that, but there's a way to execute it and a way not to. Like I said, had they reworked this story specifically, you could have had a really suspenseful and creepy story for this season. But instead, it just feels really chopped up, and I don't know if just maybe there's a lot of footage missing. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case, if maybe the creative overhaul, for whatever reason, cut a lot of Muse's footage out. Maybe for the best. I don't know. I haven't seen it, and I wasn't there. But whatever the case may be, it does feel very odd and disappointing. He served his purpose, but a character can serve their purpose in a way that still works in the story and in a way that's still satisfying, you know? And here, it feels like they fucked up. You know, it feels like they chopped up this original storyline to pieces, or there just wasn't that much there to begin with, you know? There's a lot of really great potential in this story and it could have been one of the best storylines you've gotten with Charlie Cox Daredevil. However, because there's so little left of the Muse story, and because so much of it was clearly either cut or not properly thought through, it just feels out of place, and, like I said, a waste of fucking time. So, how do we fix this issues? Well, number one, the scene from episode 2 where Heather meets Muse, put that in episode 1. And then after that, either at the end of episode 1 or beginning of 2, have Muse visit Heather and take this opportunity to develop this world of Daredevil. Because, as I'll discuss in my next Born Again video, the way they develop this world of Daredevil in this show, this new world, I'm talking about Cherry, fucking Kirsten, and Heather, is dog shit. Heather gets the best end of the stick, but they have done such a poor job characterizing these people, it pisses me off. So take this opportunity to develop these characters. Develop the annoying piece of shit that is Cherry. Develop Kirsten McDelphy, and develop Heather. Show that she has a good heart and wants to help people. Have in-depth scenes with her and Bastion. You don't have to dedicate a full episode to it, But just have a few scenes in episode 2 and 3 showcasing how they connect, having her dig deep into his trauma, understanding why he's there, and you can even have him maybe trying to avoid his urges, you know? You could have her indirectly inspire him by telling him to, you know, display some of his art around the town, you know? Maybe she accidentally encourages him to snap. That's when people start disappearing, and you could have a really great story. Continue having these therapy scenes, and throughout them, build up that suspense. Make the audience wonder, oh fuck, is he gonna fucking murder her here? What is his end goal now? You know, and after he becomes Muse, show that he becomes more confident and a little more disturbingly comfortable. Really disturb the audience. And then you keep building up until episode 7 when she realizes that he is Muse, the serial killer. He kidnaps Heather, Matt comes in, fights him. You have Muse and Daredevil fight, and then after Muse is cornered and has essentially lost the fight, he takes his own life and stabs himself in the throat, falls down, and poses like he does in the actual show. And there we have the end to Muse's arc. So I would still have him die in episode 7, because like I said, he'll be back anyway. And it's a great way to show that how he gets his powers, I'm sure. This way you can build more suspense, and you can have more characterization for both Heather and Bastion. And throughout the show, you can show how he was loosely inspired to become Muse, and you can even show him freak out after Daredevil intervenes. You know, you could do some cool stuff with that, but you have to take your time and develop these characters. And had he been more of a central focus rather than just a subplot, maybe they could have done that. Like I said, I still think it can work as a subplot. I just laid out how it could. But had he been the main focus, I do think we would have gotten a much better story overall. Overall, that's how I would fix the Muse story, and that is the problem with the Muse story. There's just not enough there. Alright, that's it for this video. I know it was kind of a quick one. My next one's going to be on the entire Born Again show and my full in-depth thoughts. I have a lot to say, and I will see you guys then.